So this is going to be part 2 of the grief diary, or if that's what we're calling it. We had Dad's funeral last week, which was it was good. It was actually really good. It definitely didn't feel as um weighty or as kind of emotionally draining as Mum's funeral did, which, I think there's a lot of reasons for that. Um, One of the reasons is just, time and proximity. Mum raised us. I think I mentioned in the last video, Dad left when, we're probably very, very young, 4 or 5, maybe. So Mum was always there, and there was another side to it as well, I think, with the connection with Mum, which I'm just starting to kind of unpack more now, really, as I reflect on, the relationships, which I'll come on to more in this video, because, the relationship we have with our parents is so, and, not even just in the context of me and Ben, but just I think for anyone, they're so, incredibly complex and intricate, Um, but anyway, so yeah, so that was there's that element. There's also the element with Mum, though, of the fact that I think I really felt a very big sense of responsibility around her safety slash well-being, almost. Because Dad was remarried, he started a new family, so I felt okay. Like, it gave me comfort knowing that he's okay. He's looked after, he's got his family, he's not alone. Whereas for Mum, she didn't have that. She didn't really have many friends, especially in her later years. She'd moved around a lot, and she lived in Maidenhead for a very long time. She's very integrated there into the community, and then she's kind of uprooted from there. And so I think, that did give me a lot of concern. And I felt like it was almost this reluctant burden I felt of having to be there for her. Like, of course, I wanted to look after her, but there was almost this kind of feeling of maybe like, what's the word? Like, begrudgingly so, because I felt a sense of expectation from her for me to be there. And it's funny because if she didn't ask, I would have. It's almost like this. Yeah, I don't know. It's like I've never liked to be told what to do. Like, if somebody tells me to do something, I really don't like it. If somebody doesn't ask me, like, I am and will be and can be the most caring person in the world, as long as you're not putting that pressure on me. If I can do it from my own accord, then I will be. And I think that's where, again, there was a lot of, maybe anger there around that, both anger and responsibility as well. So it was a very complex relationship with Mum. Obviously, the fact that she was such an important person in my life, I loved her so very deeply, and she was always there. So I think that has been that was, of course, a much more, I think, emotionally draining experience. Whereas with Dad, it wasn't quite like that. It was more with Dad's funeral. It was interesting. It was, this man who has shaped us just as much as Mum, but we didn't really know that much about, and there's only things that we began to understand in much later years. And it was interesting because there was people from all walks of life, people he went to school with. There was people from his, like, career in the city, all different banks that he'd worked at. There were people in, when he worked in the school in his later years, friends, family. So it was a real mixture, and people had seen him through different stages of his life. So it was actually fascinating I think it was fascinating to hear the consistent thread, which was really funny and really interesting, in that everyone said he was just this like really um very relaxed, very chilled, um, fun, mischievous, just big, social energy, life of the party style energy. And whilst I'm not so much life of the party style energy, it's funny that, I think a lot of my friends would describe me as this very chill, fun, relaxed person. And I had never seen him like that. Um, Maybe more toward his later years, but I think, the perception I had of him growing up, and I think probably Ben as well, is he was this is what I said in my eulogy, the briefcase and suit banker. Um, and he was very strict with us. So I'd never seen this fun, relaxed side. And I think it's, I don't know because I'm not a parent, but I can imagine for parents, it's extremely difficult. And I think, maybe you do act out of character. I can imagine for me, if I have kids one day, there probably would be this strange sense of, wanting to be like silly, fun, go and do what you want. But then at the same time, like questioning, is that the right thing to do? Should I really be doing that? Maybe I should, um, so yeah, I think it was just really fascinating to hear that, and it's so interesting. I thought, oh, maybe he just changed. What I wrote in my eulogy was that, like, it seemed like he changed later in life because he did. He did later change, and he became very accepting and very understanding. And it was all previously about you have to get good grades, you have to do this, you need to get a good career, and then later in life it was kind of like, hey, do what you want. Like even Ben with his artistic endeavors, he was just so proud and supportive of that person. But before it was kind of like, Ben, what are you doing? Like you need to get a real job type energy. And I thought that had changed, but maybe what's actually happened is he has always been that way. And, but he maybe had this parental I don't know, maybe pressure or lens that he was looking at things through and wondering if he was doing it right or wrong. So really interesting and yeah, kind of fascinating to see that really. I did still feel very much a day after quite drained. I mean that I just think it was more with mum. It definitely felt like this emotional drain, like void. I think for dad's funeral, because there were so many people there, I think I just felt quite drained. And so many people come up to me afterwards, and me and Ben, and introducing themselves. No, I'm this person. It's like, oh god, it's just so much to take in. Um, so yeah, that was interesting. And now it's all kind of said and done. And there's, like I said in the last video, it's a kind of weird thing that you're left with of like, oh, okay, life goes on now. We carry on, we do our thing, we get on with life. Which does it still does feel strange and jarring and like, you know, oh, is that it? Like it's just, such important people who've been there for so long, and you know, it's like that's it now. Um, it's like it's a really just jarring, strange thing that it just that's it comes to an end, like that. Um, yeah, really interesting. And I've been writing just a lot of, trying to do a lot more journaling and reflecting on a lot more things, like I mentioned earlier in the video, in terms of figuring out how the different complex ways and things that I've maybe haven't even processed, because especially with to come back to mum again, the past year or since she got ill was just such a roller coaster. I remember she called, I don't know when it was, maybe June. And I still remember getting that phone call. I was playing a game at the time and had a phone call from mum. I think it was quite late. I thought it was a bit strange. She doesn't normally call out of the blue like that. Just, I can't remember what time it was, maybe 10, 11 o'clock. And she sounded weird. Sounded like, I picked up the phone, there's just silence. And I was like, hello? And she's like, Thomas. I could tell she'd been like crying or something. And I was like, oh my God. And she said, I've got a brain tumor. I'm so sorry. And she was just like apologizing and, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I've got a brain tumor. And I was like, okay, like, where are you? Like, what's happened? And she's like, I don't know. I think I, had a seizure and blah, blah, blah. She's like, I'm at the hospital. I was like, okay, like, what hospital are you at? And I drove down there to Brighton, and Ben and Sky was there as well, I think. There she was in the hospital bed, and I think they obviously, she'd had the seizure and they'd then done the scans, and even that whole thing was crazy, just how lucky she was when she had the seizure, because she lives alone, right? So she could have been, God knows, like how long I don't know what would have happened really, but she had just happened to, she managed to make it outside, and she knocked on the neighbor's door, and luckily they were in, and they kind of let her in, and they called an ambulance. The ambulance took her. So, and it's funny because, well, it's not funny, but it's crazy how, she, before this had happened, she'd gone into her GP because she was feeling strange. I think she'd been feeling anxious, depressed, and then her, I think the biggest symptom was her speech started going. And I remember her asking me, she was like, my speech started going. And I was like, oh yeah, like a friend of mine gets out sometimes when they're like really, stressed and anxious. And she was like, oh, okay. And then she went into the doctors, and the doctor said, oh yeah, no, it sounds like you're suffering from depression. And they prescribed her with antidepressants. And then it literally, I think within a week of her being prescribed that was then when she had the seizure. And they're like, oh no, you've actually got a brain tumor, which is why it was affecting. I don't know if the anxiety and depression was anything to do with it, but the speech was obviously caused by the swelling in the brain, and the side of the brain it was on. So yeah, that will happen. So I then, I was back and forth pretty much every other day between Reading, where I was living, and here. Um, and then I eventually moved in with her. And I then, in the same apartment block, this is where I'm living now, moved from Reading to here to be closer to her. I was like 4 doors down from her apartment. And then she had the brain surgery, and then we kind of looked after recovering from that. And she was kind of getting back to the stage where, okay, cool, it's looking good. She had follow-up scans, everything fine. Moved into a new place that she was renting. And then she had another seizure around Christmas Day, in fact. And then they did small scans, and they said, it looks like it's coming back. And then after that, like January this year, so this was last year, so January of this year, it then just went downhill so quickly. She was staying with me, and then things just progressed so rapidly, from her having chemo. And it felt like, initially she was having just trouble walking, so OT comes around, put loads of equipment in. Then all of a sudden I'm getting like these big hoists in because she can't get up out of her chair. And then all of a sudden there's a hospital bed in my spare room, and next to the main bed, and to put in a hospital bed so she could sit up. And then it's a commode, and then she can't go to the toilet. And so I'm like becoming a full-time carer, and this all happened so quickly. And then eventually in April time, we moved her into the care home. And I remember something that I kind of came back to me the other day that was actually really quite sad, when I was speaking to her. And my cousin in Australia, New Zealand, I actually don't know why. My cousin very kindly and lovingly had, I think a family friend or something of theirs had cancer, and they'd managed to, cure it or send it into the remission by ivermectin, which is an anti-parasitic drug. It's normally prescribed for parasite infections, but there's been a lot of small-scale studies, which obviously don't get large-scale funding because it's not in pharmaceuticals' interest to invest in things like that. So they just don't get the funding they deserve. But there's been some really interesting early evidence in small-scale studies showing that it works through the same pathways because, it works through the same pathways because parasites share a lot of the same, just metabolic profile or the same kind of functions. They feed off a lot of the same things as the cancer cells do. So anyway, they sent mum that, and there was a lot of reluctance around. Like mum, I think, was very apprehensive about taking it, and I said, "What are you worried about?" And she didn't really kind of clearly answer for a while. She's like, "I'm worried the care home might get into trouble because it's not prescribed." And then she said to me, a couple of days when she did start taking it, and she said, "What if it works?" I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "Well, what if it works? What then?" She said, "Am I just going to go back to being how I always was?" I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "Well, I just feel always so, I seem to always get stuck in these situations, where I'm just so stressed and I'm anxious and I'm worried all the time. And, am I just going to go back to that?" That was really sad. It was really, it was really sad to hear that. And I said, "I don't know, mum. I maybe you will, you know." And it's interesting because sometimes there is this feeling, and it's weird because I'm generally a very, for anyone who knows me will know I'm a very, very positive, glass half full person, very optimistic on everything, very fun loving, just always the optimist. Um, but it does feel like some people are just destined for hardship, you know? And I don't know, part of me feels like there is something around, like, energetic frequency, the kind of energy that we are. If we expect bad things to happen to us, bad things will happen to us. Um, and I think I've always been very blessed because I just always think good things are going to happen to me, and they always do. And I think that's such a large part of it. Um, but even then, even saying that for myself, there are moments where, and I think I've become quite good over the years at catching myself when there is a negative voice. And pretty much all negative events that have happened, if I'm honest with myself and I look back, there's always been a negative bit of self-talk. And if I've ever been in a state where I'm just pure flow, pure bliss, this abundance of good things just comes my way. So there's part of me that does believe that as well. But then, you know, there is also another part of me that kind of thinks, and I remember Jane actually said this to me, um, we don't, nobody really knows, there's this idea of like karma and karmic debt. And even karma aside, because I think karma is quite a loaded word, and I think it's quite misunderstood, by a lot of people. People think it's like retribution, like you've done something wrong and you're getting your, what you deserve. Like it's not actually about that. It's just the kind of this Western interpretation of it. Anyway, but where I was going with that was that even karma aside, I think there is a, some people call this like your soul's purpose. And there is a belief that, which I actually do align with and resonate with, in that, God is oneness, everything, and essentially we are all God, right? We are all connected and we're all different expressions of God. And it's the ability, humans are a way, or everything is a way for God being able to experience everything, the creator experiencing everything in all of its different forms, you know? And there is an argument to be had that maybe this is just something God wants to experience through some people. Pain. It's not like he's not trying to hurt that person, because I think as well, like, he probably knows, or she probably knows, it probably knows in its infinite wisdom, there is no real pain. These people are just part of me and they come back to me at the end of all of it anyway. This is just all, an illusion, for want of a better word. It's a projection of God. So there is no real pain. We perceive it as pain. So it's hard for us down here when we see our loved ones in pain, but actually maybe that is what God wanted to experience that. And you might be saying to yourself, well, wow, that doesn't make sense. Why would God ever want to experience pain? Well, ask yourself this. Why would people go to the movies to watch a sad movie? Why do people go to the movie to watch horror movies? Why do those movies exist, and why do they exist and are released to such critical acclaim, and people go to in the masses? TV series we watch, the drama, the pain, the heartbreak, people are obsessed with it. And that, I think, is just the perfect example. We want to experience everything. We want to feel everything so deeply, but we want to do so within safe confines, right? So if you think about, God living as this full expression, that's exactly what she is doing. We're all safe. We are all part of this oneness. There is no hurt and pain. It's all perceived and it's all part of this experience. Anyway, but I'm going on like a rant here, but it's interesting. And I just remember, really reflecting on that thing Mum had, and it was, and maybe you can argue that's just a way for me to be being able to reconcile the sadness and the heartbreak of that comment. But no, I do genuinely feel that, and it does just really make sense to me, you know. Um, Look, we're always, I think, going to try to find reasons and meaning in seemingly unexplainable um things, like, why do kids get cancer, and why does this happen, and why does that happen? There is also as well the collateral beauty that is left behind from such events, amongst the pain and the heartache. And there are inevitable, like I mentioned in the last video, the changes that happen to other people as a result of somebody else's passing. It's real, it's indisputable. And the things that can go on to create, I mean, nothing has happened as yet, but I might have mentioned this in the last video. I think I did, yeah. When Mum was struggling with her communication, I made an app. I made an app to help her talk, and pretty damn good if you ask me. Like, you can upload. I could upload her voice to it, and it can create like an AI version of the voice. So for somebody who can't speak, somebody who's lost their voice through, whether it be a brain condition, whether it be any other condition that has impacted the voice, they are able to communicate as them, which is, I think, a big thing for these people. And there's basically like blocks, and you can it adapts as well to whether it's morning or day, and what, if you want to ask for a cup of tea, or and you can kind of select initially. You go down in different levels, so it's like, I feel this, or I want this, or y- and then it goes down further, so it's freeing up a lot of that, like, cognitive bandwidth, and making it easy for the person to communicate. I think there are apps that like that exist out there, but a lot of them are paid and quite expensive. And what I'm looking to do at the moment, I've been speaking to our local hospice here, and I want to roll it out and give it for free to, you know hospices, or care homes, nursing homes, all across the UK, or, I mean, all across the world, if I can. Um, and that's come from this experience, like, yeah. And I've always said, like, that will be will be mum's legacy almost, if it does take off, and it does help others. That's something I didn't make it, like, it was through her. So, yeah, it's interesting. And that's what I mean, by collateral beauty. There's so many things that come out of these situations, that are almost impossible to see, I think, at the time, other than the pain, the hurt. But there's a lot of things that do inevitably come out of these situations. Um, yeah. I mean, the other thing as well that I think is interesting, there's always so many, I think, questions and routes that you can go down, and I think this is where um grief can become, or not even just grief, but anything, I guess, can become a real negative spiral. And, like, one of the things I did almost catch myself thinking before is, like, oh, what if we hadn't sent her to the care home? I wonder if things would have been different. um I mean, there's so many what ifs, right? You could say, what if her GP, was a bit more thorough, and they didn't just prescribe her or diagnose her with depression, and they said, no, let's get you scanned, and then they found it earlier. Would that have made a difference? There are always going to be a million what ifs. And I think and again, you could argue maybe this is just a coping mechanism, but it is a very fundamental belief I have, in that I don't really regret anything I did when I was younger. But and the reason for this, it's not like this kind of you know ego driven, "Oh, I don't regret anything" kind of thing. It's more just a case of, like, the reason I don't regret anything is because I know that we know nothing, that I know nothing, that we're not privy to the way in which the world works. And no matter what we do, what decisions we make, the universe will do its own thing. There was a video, it's actually like a Gary Vee video, I think, that I saw years ago. It's a fantastic video, and it's about, choice and decisions and decision paralysis and regret, and, oh, did I make the right choice? How do I make the right choice? And not doing something because you're so unsure, and then, having to live with the regret. And, he gives this example in there about how, somebody who, I don't know, maybe they accept a job instead of going for this dream job, and then they're like, oh, if only I'd done that, and, my life would have been so much different, things could have been so much better. To us, it might look like that, like, everything we can see within our limited understanding of the universe, of the cosmos, right? It might seem like that was obviously the right decision, and I've screwed it up. But little do we know, he says you could have got on that plane to, the States and started this new dream job. And you could have been going to work first thing that morning, been really tired because you didn't sleep from jet lag. You weren't looking, you crossed the road and you got hit by a bus or by a taxi and you ended up in hospital in a coma and then you died 4 days later. You just don't know. This is the thing, like, no matter how obvious, how like, you know, how much we might believe that is the right thing. That was definitely the right decision. I fucked this up. I can't believe this. No matter how obvious it seems to us, we just like, we cannot comprehend. We can do everything. Anything we do, it can always be overridden. Anything. Like we might all, for all we know, like if we get into nuclear war, we're all gonna flip and die anyway. Like all these things that we're worrying about, and it's like, no, don't worry. The universe will do its own thing. Like whatever you do, it doesn't really matter. And that might almost sound like nihilistic, but I don't say it from that regard. I say it from a place of, actual. I think it's a liberating feeling when you really kind of hold on to that, in that like we can still make decisions in our, you know, truest um expression, what feels right to us at the time. That is the best thing we can do, is to do what feels right to us in that moment, whatever it is, without being caught up with, is it the right thing? Is it the wrong thing? Am I going to regret it? What does it feel like in that moment in time to us? Knowing that we will never have known, and we will never know anyway. If we've made a decision, we will never know what the alternative would have been. Fact. We might think we know. We might think, oh, that definitely would have been a better decision. We don't know. We do not know. Um, so I just think, it's interesting though, because you can, there are so many things that you can kind of look back on and feel sad about. And it's kind of like, it's just a dangerous road to go down, I think. And yeah, like, there's nothing that's going to ever change anything. You never would have known. Like, for all I know, it could have been even worse. And I think, again, when I think about the decision to move her into the nursing home as well, I think that was a perfect example of me making what felt like the right decision. And actually, I'm really glad that I did. Whether she would have lived for longer or not, it sounds like maybe she didn't want that anyway. And also what I'm really glad about, and this is why I made this decision, was because, I didn't feel like I was able to be a son to her anymore. I was becoming her carer. And it was hard toward the end. I was getting up like 4 or 5 times in the night. She'd, be calling me at 1 a.m., 3 a.m., 5 a.m., 7 a.m. She needs to go to the toilet and just wasn't sleeping, at all. Um, and it was incredibly distressing. I said to a friend the other day, actually, my ringtone on my phone is actually quite traumatic, because there's that period where I had to have my phone on loud. So when she's, calling me, if I was asleep, my phone would ring. And I just remember the constant wake ups and that ringtone. And it's like, oh, and then as well, like even before she was living here, just the kind of fear in my nervous system was just trained to like, I've got the phone's ringing. Oh gosh, she's had a seizure. Like it was a horrible time. And like, there's so much, um, uh yeah, like it's just such a like a trigger. So when I hear that ringtone now, I'm just like, oh my god. So I really I do need to change it, actually. But yeah, I can't really remember where I was going with that whole thread. um where was I going with that? No, I don't know, actually. No. Anyway, I think that's it's kind of it's kind of it. I mean, one of the things, I've been doing some counseling sessions recently as well, and something that's come up in this, and I really, really strongly feel this is this a point on kind of integration of all of the feelings and all of the parts of me as well, and this is where, my childhood and reflecting on the relationship with my parents and what that's meant and how that's formed me over the years. It's a really kind of fascinating time to reflect on that, because again, the loss of both parents does leave this void, and the void is also a space for recreation, to redefine who am I now without these people in my life. Although they are in my life, but in a different capacity, form, I guess, if that makes sense. So it's kind of, reshaping and redefining that. And I think, yeah, I think it's just really interesting, because one thing that I have reflected on a lot is how as I am now, I often oscillate between, I'm feeling much more, I guess, energized today. I don't feel particularly down. I've got good energy. I think I said in the last one about me feeling very lethargic. And I oscillate between these different feelings, very contrasting feelings. And I've always felt like that. It's funny, and when I look at both of my parents, especially with the funerals as well, they were very different people. Mum had this both incredibly powerful people, but mum had a very kind of quiet, peaceful, graceful power, right? And dad had a very loud, life of the party power to him. Um, so, they are two big people, opposite energies. And so, yeah, I have often bounced between those. And, there's this thread through my session so far of like integrating those together, like making peace where the two of those worlds can coexist together, and for them to not have to be or live as these kind of independent parts of me, which can lead to feelings of, almost like an internal separation. It's like a kind of healing and bringing these two parts of me together. Um, so yeah, I'm in a state at the moment. Again, I'm kind of oscillating between them, but like where I'm trying to piece these two together, which I'm excited about. I am excited about. So we'll see, how these things unfold. Um, and again, it's early. It's still early days. Obviously Father's Day was on Sunday, which I didn't really impact me necessarily. I didn't. I thought it might, but it wasn't actually that hard. I think Mother's Day, again, for all the reasons I mentioned earlier, will probably be harder. Um, but yeah, we'll have to see how things uh, evolve as time goes on, and hopefully I can take you guys with me on that journey, and that continue to hopefully uh, be some benefits in this for other people as well, because again, there certainly is for me. It's good to kind of talk through these things. So yeah, I'll see you guys next time.